Story 1. He never entered my house, but my fridge knew him. This happened to me in 2019. At the time, I had just moved into a one-bedroom apartment on the edge of my hometown in Oregon. Nothing glamorous, small kitchen, carpeted floor, a window that faced the back alley. I was 26, recently out of a bad job and a worse relationship. Living alone wasn't something I was used to, but the quiet felt like a kind of healing. I started waking up early, cooking more, trying to build something that resembled a routine. Most evenings I got home around 6:30 p.m., made dinner, and sat in front of the TV with my cat curled up on the armrest. I kept the same grocery list every week. Eggs, coffee, chicken, frozen peas, oat milk. I stocked my fridge like clockwork. It started subtle. One Thursday night, I opened the fridge, and the ketchup was gone. Just gone. Not moved or expired, not there. I assumed I hadn't bought a new bottle yet. No big deal. I made a mental note and moved on. The next week it was the eggs. I swore I had half a carton left the day before, but when I went to make breakfast, the entire carton was missing. Not spoiled or broken, just not there. I stood in the kitchen longer than I should have, just looking at the empty shelf. There was no mess, no crumbs, just absence. I began thinking I was slipping. I wasn't sleeping great. I worked in IT, long hours, low light. Maybe I was forgetting things, but then came the sugar. I never use sugar. I drink my coffee black. But on a Tuesday morning, I opened the cabinet and there was a small opened bag of white sugar sitting between the cereal and the peanut butter. I didn't own that brand. I hadn't bought that bag. I stared at it for several minutes before picking it up. It was half used, folded neatly at the top as if someone had been opening it regularly. That's when I stopped feeling forgetful. That's when I started feeling watched. I checked the windows. They were locked. I checked the front door. No signs of a break-in. I called the property manager to ask about maintenance. He said no one had entered my unit. The changes kept happening. My dish soap moved from the left to the right side of the sink. The toilet paper roll reversed. A single apple went missing. Then it came back. Yes. One day, there were 5 apples in the bowl. The next day, 4. I noticed it immediately. I even looked in the trash. Nothing. But 2 days later, there were 5 again. Same ones. I could tell by the small bruise on the yellow one. At some point, the air itself felt wrong. Not colder, just interfered with. Like someone had moved through it too recently. I stopped sleeping through the night. One time, I set my alarm for 6:30 a.m. and woke up at 5:17. My alarm had already been turned off. It didn't go off while I was asleep. It was manually disabled. I lived alone. I started taking pictures of the fridge every morning before work. Eggs, milk, chicken, orange juice. I'd open the camera, snap a shot, and leave. When I came home, I'd compare the contents. For 2 days, everything stayed the same. Then, on Friday, the orange juice was gone, but I hadn't touched it. I checked the photo from that morning. It was there, right between the water pitcher and a jar of olives. But now the spot was empty. The jar had shifted slightly. That night, I pushed a chair under the front doorknob. I locked all the windows. I left my bedroom lamp on while I slept. I even put tape over the fridge door to see if it would be peeled back in the morning. The tape was gone by sunrise. No tear, no residue, just gone. One morning in early March, I came into the kitchen and saw a post-it note stuck to the microwave. Don't forget your lunch. Same pink sticky notes I always used. Same pen, same handwriting, round lettering, small loops. But I hadn't written it. I stood there for what felt like minutes, staring at it. I opened the trash. No crumpled notes. I checked my work bag. No notes missing. It was identical to my writing. But I knew, absolutely knew, that it wasn't mine. That's when I started to feel less like I was being watched and more like I was being mimicked. Over the next week, I found more. One was on the inside of the fridge door. Buy more creamer. I'd never run out of creamer. Another was stuck to the bathroom mirror. Clean me. Same letters, same tilt to the left. I stopped writing notes altogether. I started keeping my notepad locked in my desk drawer, but the sticky notes kept coming. One said, "You're doing great." Another said, "Smile more." None of them were overtly threatening, but every one of them felt like a cut just under the skin. The voice wasn't mine, but it used my tone, my words. It spoke to me the way I spoke to myself. I replaced my door locks, bought a new camera for inside the kitchen, installed it facing the fridge. That same night I stayed awake and watched the feed. At 3:14 a.m., the fridge door opened. But there was no one in the frame, no hand, no movement, just the door slowly swinging open. It stayed ajar for 8 full minutes, then closed again. The camera never caught anyone entering or leaving. I checked the footage 100 times. It didn't make sense. I called the police. They came, looked at the video. One of them asked if I'd edited it. Another told me it might be a malfunction, that cheap cameras can glitch. But it wasn't a glitch, because the next morning there was a post-it on the fridge camera itself. "You saw me." It was around this time I started losing my sense of chronology. Days bled into each other. I'd forget conversations, forget what I wore the day before. On Monday, I found a voicemail on my phone that I didn't remember recording. It was from me. The voice was definitely mine, but the tone was off, slow, drawn out. I said, "Hey, it's me. Just making sure you got home safe." I never left myself a message. I didn't even remember calling. Another time, I found a shopping list in my wallet with 3 items I never buy: smoked salmon, almond yogurt, and coconut shampoo, all written in my handwriting. I don't eat fish. I hate coconut. But the list was mine. My therapist called it identity bleed. A stress response, she said, where people under long-term psychological harassment begin to fragment. Perceptual overlap. She said it's common in stalking victims. I asked her if it was normal to feel like someone was trying to replace you, not hurt you, not rob you, but become you. She didn't answer. The final note came on a Thursday. I woke up groggy, walked into the bathroom. I hadn't slept well, kept hearing the fridge click open and shut through the night. There was condensation on the mirror, as if someone had just showered. I hadn't. On the mirror, written with a finger, "You don't need to be here anymore." Same handwriting, same small loops, same tilt. I didn't scream. I didn't call the police. I just left. I packed a bag and got in the car. I didn't even turn off the lights. That was 2 years ago. I never went back. I moved states, changed my name on the lease, never updated my forwarding address. But sometimes, when I open the fridge at night, I still feel like it recognizes me, like I'm opening something that doesn't quite belong to me anymore. Did you enjoy the content and it made a difference for you? Click on Super Thanks and support our work. Story 2. The Man Who Knew My Schedule. Before I did this, happened to me in 2021. At the time, I was living in a small city just outside Milwaukee, working as a barista and finishing my last semester of college. I didn't own a car, so everything I did followed a rhythm: bus routes, walk times, shifts, classes. My schedule wasn't secret, but it wasn't obvious either. My days were a loop: class, work, home, repeat. There wasn't much room for improvisation. That's why it took me so long to notice what was happening. It started with a shift swap. I normally opened the shop on Thursdays, but my manager asked if I could cover an evening shift instead. I didn't think twice. I texted my friend Olivia to reschedule our usual lunch. That morning I left 2 hours later than I usually would have. There was a man waiting at the bus stop near my building. I'd never seen him before. Late 30s, thin, weathered-looking, wearing a light grey coat with a tear under one sleeve. He was standing too close to the bus pole, not reading anything, not pacing, just there, watching. I walked past him quickly and stood further down the sidewalk. When the bus came, I sat near the front. He sat 3 rows behind me. I told myself I was being paranoid. The next morning, I returned to my normal schedule. Open shift. Bus at 6:45 a.m. The man was back. Same coat, same spot. He didn't get on the bus that time. I mentioned it to my co-worker, half joking that maybe I had a fan. She laughed, but her face tightened. I shrugged it off. You see weird people when you use public transit. But then came the second change. That Sunday, I decided to take a different route to campus. Not because of the man, I just wanted to walk through the park. It was sunny for once, and I needed air. I left at 9:10 instead of 9 hours and took the side streets. When I reached the corner before the park entrance, the man was already there. Not walking, not talking, just leaning against a light post, looking out over the grass. He didn't move when I passed, just turned his head slightly. Not enough to be obvious, but enough that I felt it. That's when I realized something was off. It wasn't that he was following me. It was that he was always ahead of me. No matter how I changed my path, what time I left, where I stopped, which direction I came from, he appeared. Never behind, never beside, always waiting. One afternoon, I turned back mid-walk and looped around the block just to see if he'd follow. He didn't. He was standing still when I passed him again, 20 minutes later. Like he knew I'd doubled back, like he'd accounted for it. It started to feel less like being watched and more like being studied. I began to dread the small decisions, whether to take the left sidewalk or the right, whether to stop at the corner store or go straight home. Every action felt scrutinized, every option already known. There was never any contact, never a word, just presence. Like he wasn't tracking my movements, but my intentions, the routes I considered but hadn't yet taken. He was always there to confirm the choice, like he knew I'd make it. And somehow, that was worse than being followed. It meant he didn't need to trail me. He was already inside the pattern of how I thought. The messages started in early April. I got the first one on a Thursday afternoon, just after I'd changed my mind about grabbing lunch. I'd been standing outside a cafe, debating whether to go in or just eat the granola bar in my bag. At the last second, I turned and walked away. My phone buzzed immediately after. A new number. No contact name, just a time-stamped message. 12:41 p.m. You didn't go in. That was it. No sender, no thread history, just that line. I froze on the sidewalk, staring at the screen. Then another text arrived 5 seconds later. Correct. My heart dropped. I scanned the street. There were a few people walking, a couple parked cars, but nothing stood out. No one looking at me. No one I recognized. I blocked the number. 2 days later, it happened again. This time, I was getting groceries. I paused in front of the dairy aisle, reached for my usual oat milk, and then changed my mind and grabbed soy. As I dropped it into the cart, my phone buzzed. 5:12 p.m. You picked the soy. Then, seconds later, correct. Different number. I dropped the phone. The pattern continued over the next week. Always a message about a choice I had just made, usually a small one. Where to sit on the bus, which pocket I kept my keys in, whether I wore my jacket zipped or unzipped. Followed by a second message. Correct. I started thinking I was going insane. Maybe I was texting myself. Maybe my phone was cloned. I switched SIM cards. Bought a new device, turned off location tracking. The texts kept coming. I never replied, never acknowledged them, but they didn't stop. It wasn't the surveillance that broke me, it was the accuracy. They weren't describing what I had done, they were confirming what I had decided. There was a gap, seconds sometimes, between my intention and the action, and the text always came after that mental decision, but before I executed it. It meant the sender wasn't just watching, they were synced with me. I started having dreams about shadows behind glass, reflections that smiled too early. I stopped walking to class. I started taking Ubers everywhere, cash rides, no app, no trail. Still, the messages came. Sometimes I'd sit in my room and try to beat it, make chaotic, impulsive moves. I'd grab a cup, switch it for a plate, then switch back. I'd pretend to leave, then sit back down. I'd step outside and run in the opposite direction. The messages still arrived. Sometimes they said, too slow. Sometimes just, still correct. I stopped sleeping. By the end of April, I noticed something else. The messages had changed. They weren't just observing anymore, they were initiating. One morning, I got a text that said, 9 a.m., go right. I hadn't even left the building yet. I stood in my hallway, staring at the phone. It wasn't a suggestion, it was an instruction, a prediction. I left 10 minutes later and turned left. 2 hours later, another message. Incorrect. I started keeping a journal, not about what I did, about what I wanted to do. Before going to sleep, I'd write down all my intended decisions for the next day, everything from what time I'd wake up to which socks I'd wear. Then I'd do the opposite. The messages adapted. Even before I took an action, and sometimes before I even decided, I'd get the timestamp and the correct. I told myself it was a trick, that I was giving too much credit to something random. But then I saw my reflection. It was a Thursday. I was walking past a mirrored storefront near my campus. I'd been trying to breathe, just focus on my steps. I hadn't received a message in 2 days. I thought maybe it was over. Then I saw someone walking behind me, same haircut, same coat, same exact tote bag. I turned around fast. There was no one there, but the reflection had stayed a second longer than it should have. And in that moment, I didn't know if I was real or if I was the reflection. If someone had learned to replicate me so precisely that they didn't need to follow me anymore, just anticipate the version of me I hadn't lived yet. One night, I received a text at 1:42 a.m. Ready when you are. I didn't move for 2 hours. I eventually found a paper left at my door. No envelope, no name. It was a calendar. My calendar, same layout, same color highlights, but it was filled in. Dates I hadn't yet scheduled, appointments I hadn't yet made, classes I hadn't yet enrolled in. All of them were right, even the cancellations. It wasn't about stalking anymore. This was authorship. I wasn't being followed, I was being pre-written. He wasn't watching my life. He was co-authoring it from inside. Story 3. She knew my dog's name. Before I told her, this happened to me in 2020. Back then, I was living alone in a quiet part of Washington state, just outside Spokane. I'd gotten a remote tech job during the pandemic and was working from a small rental house with a fenced-in yard. My only real company was my dog, Cooper, a 4-year-old rescue mutt, half lab, half something smaller, always friendly but protective in a quiet way. We had a rhythm. Morning walks around the same 2 blocks, evenings spent throwing the ball in the yard. I didn't know many people in the neighborhood, but I liked it that way. Small routines, predictable days. The first time I saw her, I didn't think much of it. She was sitting on a bench near the dog park, sipping from a thermos. Mid-30s, shoulder-length dark hair, maroon scarf. She looked like someone who spent a lot of time outdoors. Not rugged, but deliberate. She didn't have a dog with her, but she smiled and nodded when I walked past with Cooper. That first time I nodded back. The next morning she was there again. Same bench, different scarf, still no dog. Cooper sniffed in her direction, tail wagging slightly, and she smiled again. Said, "Good boy." Her voice was soft, measured. That's what made it strange. Because I hadn't said anything to her. Not a hello, not his name, but she spoke as if she knew it. I brushed it off. Dog people talk to dogs. It's just what they do. Maybe she'd guessed. Maybe she'd overheard me say his name from across the street on some earlier walk. I didn't remember. Still, The third time she was there, I made a conscious decision to change my path. Instead of turning left toward the park, I turned right down a different residential block. Cooper pulled at the leash like he wanted the usual route, but I kept us moving. We didn't see her that morning. That night, I found a tennis ball on my porch. Old, weathered, not Cooper's, not one I recognized. I told myself it had rolled from a neighbor's yard. Maybe a kid tossed it. Maybe Cooper brought it inside and I forgot. But my house was gated, and Cooper didn't fetch alone. The next few days, I avoided the park, stuck to new paths, randomized our schedule a bit. Each morning felt slightly tense, not dangerous, just watched. It took me a while to realize what the fear actually was. It wasn't her face, or the scarf, or the silence. It was that I kept trying to find explanations, and the coincidences kept adding up. Familiarity makes you feel safe. She looked normal, she was quiet. She didn't follow me, she didn't knock, she didn't trespass. But she knew my dog's name, and that should have been enough. I don't really use social media anymore, but at the time I had a pretty locked down Instagram, small circle, mostly dog pictures. I didn't post often, once every few weeks at most, but I had the usual digital footprint. About a week after I stopped going to the park, I got a friend request. Name, Lyra. No last name. The profile picture was just a blurry forest scene. Mutual connections. None. I almost ignored it. I usually did. But something about the name felt familiar. I clicked through. Her profile was private, but the bio said, "Dog lover just passing through." The message came a few minutes later. "Cooper has the kindest eyes." That's when my stomach turned. I checked my last photo. Cooper at the beach from months ago. No close-up, no caption about his name, no tags. I didn't respond, but I didn't block her either. I don't know why. I guess part of me wanted to know what she would do next. Curiosity as self-protection, trying to stay ahead of whatever this was. The next morning she posted a new image. Her account was still private, but something in me told me to look again. When I opened her profile, it was public now. Just one visible post. The photo showed my dog, from behind, standing at the edge of my backyard, looking out through the slats in the fence. The angle was unmistakable, taken from the alley, zoomed in, through the boards. You could see the blurred shape of my kitchen window behind him. The caption said, "He waits." No hashtags. No comments, no likes. My vision went white. I don't know how long I stood there, but I dropped my phone at some point. My body had reacted before my brain had caught up. I found myself leaning over the sink, mouth open, gasping like I just sprinted a mile. I gagged, then threw up. It wasn't just the invasion, it was the intimacy, the way she'd caught him still, waiting for me, the way she'd used that moment, like she'd been watching long enough to know when he stands there, how he moves, how the light hits at 6:40 a.m. It was more than stalking. It was narrative. I reported the photo, then I blocked her. But I knew she'd already seen everything she wanted to. I started calling it proximity rot, that feeling of decay in the ordinary. The way normal places start to feel unsafe after being watched from too close for too long. It got worse after the photo. I installed cameras around the perimeter, one above the gate, one pointing at the porch, one inside, just in case. I started carrying pepper spray. I kept Cooper leashed even in the backyard. Then came the laundromat. It was a Tuesday, mid-morning. I usually did laundry on Thursdays, but I decided to switch it up. When I got there, I felt the air change as soon as I walked in. She was there, folding clothes she didn't seem to be using, no detergent bottle, no laundry bag. She looked up and smiled. "Hey, it's Cooper, right?" I didn't answer, just stared. She tilted her head. "He's so sweet. I saw you guys at the park a while back." I said nothing. She laughed softly like I was being awkward. Then, "I actually used to live in your house. Years ago, you have the fence, right?" I turned and left. Didn't grab my clothes, didn't look back. I drove 20 minutes to a different laundromat the next week. 2 days later, she posted a new photo, a basket of folded shirts. Caption, "Sometimes people leave before they're finished." I stopped sleeping entirely. I started tracking every location she'd appeared. Dog park, grocery store, post office, laundromat, places I thought I had chosen at random. But she'd always been there first. Later, I learned the term for what she was doing: parasocial intrusion. Not delusion, not a case of someone mistaking friendliness for intimacy. This wasn't about confusion. This was about planning. She'd orchestrated every appearance, not just followed me, predated my decisions. She'd been to every location days, sometimes weeks, before I showed up. She'd mapped my routes, noted my patterns, noticed when I hesitate, when I repeat, when I feel safe. She didn't break in. She waited for me to open the door. One night I came home and found my back gate slightly ajar. The latch wasn't broken, just not fully closed. There was a note tucked into the top slat, just a torn piece of paper. It said, "You always choose blue bowls when you're sad." I didn't understand it at first, until I stepped inside and saw Cooper's food dish. I had two, one gray, one blue. I'd used the blue one that morning. I grabbed Cooper, locked the bedroom door, and stayed up until sunrise with a knife in my hand. That was the last night we stayed in that house. I broke my lease the next day, packed everything in 48 hours, got a short-term sublet across the state. I changed my phone number, deleted my social accounts. I even cut my hair, but the fear didn't leave because she never did anything illegal, never threatened me, never trespassed, not in a way I could prove. She just entered every space before I did and made herself feel familiar. She wasn't obsessed with me. She was already part of me. And I don't think she ever wanted to hurt me. I think she wanted to replace me.